back, everybody. This is the part two of the criminal justice series where we are comparing and we're juxtaposing the American criminal justice system with European criminal justice system. And it is my pleasure to have attorney Vera Zambrano back with us today. And for those of you who missed the part one, right, and you can look it up, but for part one, if you missed it, attorney Vera Zambrano is a practicing attorney here in the U.S. and also in Germany, and she's based out of Miami, Florida. She's also a member of the German American Lawyers Association, and she is a member of the International Bar Association. Vera, welcome back to the show. Thank you for doing a part two with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and yes, very happy to continue with one of our topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, last time we talked, I mean, we ended the podcast and we were just talking about this. And then you and I continued to talk, and we talked for about 45 minutes about all this amazing content, amazing information that you possess, that you have, stuff that you're privy to, experiences that you had that I think would have been valuable for our audience. And that's why we're doing now a series. And I love it because it really is fascinating, right? You hear about, you know, the American criminal justice system. Some people, you know, have this belief, right, that it's the best in the world. And then studies have been done, and they've shown that, you know, in the ranking, that's not necessarily the case. And it might be the best in some ways, it maybe not in other ways. So it's a pleasure, and it's really I'm honored to have you here on this podcast to talk to us a little bit about the specifics, right, the nuances that you understand that maybe our audience doesn't understand.
Exactly, and you have a great knowledge too. You know a lot about these topics we were talking about today, about the civil rights comparison between the US and Europe. It's very, very dynamic, right? We have a lot of changes. We saw a lot of changes during COVID, especially. And yes, very happy to talk about this topic today.
Awesome, cool. So let's jump right into it. So I wanted to start off with the Bill of Rights, right? So here in the US, we have what's known as the Bill of Rights. I wanted to ask you if there's something comparable in Europe, and maybe more specifically in Germany. And I think maybe, and you can tell me how you want to approach this. Maybe we start off with Germany, and then you can tell me, because, you know, obviously Europe, you're talking to, you know, about a dozen countries or so. So maybe we start off with Germany, right? Which is, you know, you're an attorney there. And then you can tell me maybe about a few other countries that you're familiar with, whether or not they have a Bill of Rights. And the same thing with some of the other questions. But specifically with the Bill of Rights, is there such a thing in Germany? And can you expand on that just a bit?
Yes, I would like to start with, you know, Bill of Rights in the US, like in general, right? It's a lot of people don't know it's the oldest and also the largest surviving constitutional republic, right? So there's a lot of countries that copied the Bill of Rights, actually. And the most important differences between the US Constitution and the European Constitution, right? Europe has 27 member countries. One of it is Germany, but the EU, the Europe Constitution, has also a concept of rights, but it's very different. So when we have the Bill of Rights in the US, these are rights of the individual against the state, so against the government. In Europe, it's the other way around. These are legal rights of individual that are provided by the state, by the government, to protect the individuals. So it's a different effect. It's the opposite effect, if you will.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by the opposite effect?
Yes, so it's a catalog, especially in Germany. We have, you know, the fundamental rights, so the basic law, which is called the Constitution, right? We have 19 articles that are including all the rights, freedoms of individuals provided by the state. So it's not something that you have to, you know, you have to enforce against the state, right? It's something that is provided by the state to protect the individual citizen. Yes, so it's a different concept, right? Because the history of the US and Europe is very different too. So that is just you know, one consequence of the different developments in both territories.
That's interesting. And you said there's 19 of those in
Yes,
Germany?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know how many of those are you able to, you know, kind of just share with us? I mean, just off the top of your head, I'm wondering what those are, because we have 10 and it seems pretty comprehensive, but I'd love to.
Yes, so we have 19. So most important is like also like in the US, the priority is, the rights that come first have the highest priority, right? So our first one is human dignity. That means human dignity shall be inviolable. That means every person, every individual, every human being has human dignity before the law. And it's a so-called eternity clause. So no government, right? No future president could ever change that. So the human dignity is the number one article. Then we have personal freedom rights, the right to free development, right to life, the right to physical integrity. Then we have the right, the equal right before the law, right? That all humans have to be seen equal before the law.
Right.
Then we have the freedom of faith and religion, right? Very important also, like Article 4. Then we have the freedom of speech, expression, art, and science. Then one also very important right is the freedom of assembly and the freedom of association. We have the right to privacy. The freedom of movement is super important in the European Union because if you are a citizen in one of the European countries, like for example, Italy or in Spain, you are free to move to any other member states without having to have a visa or any kind of permit. So you can pretty much move freely, work and live in any of the member states, which is a big deal, right? Then we have also the freedom of movement, freedom of, the right to protect your property. But one big difference is that we do not have the right to bear arms, right? That's not in our constitution.
Wow.
So that's one of the biggest differences, I would say, because it's a big, it's one of the most important rights in the US, right?
Yeah. And I'd like to be able to kind of talk about a few of these, but maybe we could talk about that one since we just covered that one. What's the reasoning behind that, or what are some of the cultural differences that have led to that not being a guaranteed right in Germany? Or can you speak to that a little bit, maybe culturally or maybe politically? What's the reasoning for that?
So the reason for that is that Germany or European systems believe in the protection is solely a task of law enforcement and the security institutions, right? Law enforcement, especially police, is the exclusive institution to protect, exactly, and not the individual citizen. We have exceptions if you are allowed to have a concealed a license to carry a gun, right? But only this is just a few people do that actually, right? When you're like ex-military, for example, and you want to continue to do so, right? You want to continue to have this in your life and to be able to exercise this right, or ex-police officers, but if you have no connection to that, you like a normal citizen would never, approach that and do the test. You have to do like tests and like in training, you have to stay continuously in training. You have to prove to the government that you know how to handle it. So it's something also that if you go to Europe or to Germany and you talk about the right to bear arms, people will not understand what you're talking about, right? Because it's the European mind doesn't include that, right? We believe in, the government is also a big difference, that the government is taking more care of people, right? So in a lot of countries, it's more towards a social and a welfare state, and the government takes care of people. It's not so much like in the US about self-responsibility and freedom, right? It's a big difference because in the US, people love their freedom, right? They want as little government as possible, to in any area of their life. So that's a big difference. And I believe also when you talk about weapons in general in Europe, because of the history we had there, right? It's the Second World War, for example. There's still a big anti behavioral mindset towards that, right? We don't believe in everyone should arm themselves, and we leave it up to the law enforcement.
Right. Now, here's a question. I mean, and I'm sure that right there leads to a lot of other questions, right, for some of our listeners. But one that I'm curious about is, you know, if you go to like here in the US, right, like in states like Texas, right, and I know a lot of people have family there, and people really talk about how Texas is known for being, relatively speaking, and it depends, right, which areas of Texas, but relatively speaking, it's considered a very safe state because you know, a large percentage of the population is armed. In fact, where I'm at here in Utah, you could probably say that, you know, 90+% of the households are probably armed. And some of
Same
them
in Florida. Exactly the same in Florida. Yeah, everyone, like at least one person of the household has a license to carry or
right.
has weapons at home. At least if it's not the dad, it's the mom, right? So you have it's yeah, that's just you know, that's just the general rule. And I just read today that that the state with most movement, like where most Americans and also internationals when they move to the United States, is not California. It's South Carolina, Florida, and Texas. Texas is like top number one. So like after Texas, there's a long, you know, there's long time no other state. So that's also something in Texas. Of course, I would say, you know, maybe eight out of 10 households have have guns. Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've heard, right, and there's no study that I've read on this, but you know that these states usually that have, you know, this type of culture, this type of mindset, like that these are states that are safer. So I'm curious, in Germany, given that, you know, that that's not part of the culture, that probably, I don't even know what percentage you would say of what percentage of Germans, German households have, you know, a weapon. And then I would love to hear how your analysis between like that and like safety, like how safe do you feel in Germany, given that most people don't have weapons and they rely completely on law enforcement?
Yes. So you could see a decrease of security within the last decades, right? There is like a proven decrease, but it does not lead to, you know, any changes in Germany or in Europe, right? So there's it's hardly unlikely that you will ever have something in a constitution like this, or, you know, especially in the constitution where you give an individual the right to bear arms. I'm pretty sure that will never happen, especially not in Germany. With, you know, with the history in mind, and everyone, like in the history classes in school already, teachers are teaching young kids that can never happen again, right? Under no circumstances is this, you know, going to happen again. And also, I believe one big part is you cannot really say which country is safer, right? In the US, it might be more dangerous when, you know, almost everyone can and will carry guns, right? But to prevent people from carrying and gaining guns, right? It's not the right way. You just have to look at, is this person training, right? Does this person train regularly? Is this person, you know, a responsible adult, right? So it's not that easy to say the more guns, the more dangerous it is, right?
Right. In fact, what you just pointed out, you said that in the last 10 years that it's getting less safe in Germany, but that's just the last 10 years, right? And Germany has had, you know, has not had a right to bear arm as a constitutional right, as a, you know, as part of their Bill of Rights. That's been the case for what, since World War II, maybe?
Yes.
Or, so then that means that the increase in crime, right, that you're seeing over the last decade is really not a direct, there's no direct correlation between that
Exactly.
and
Exactly. Yes. So a lot of Europeans, they, you know, they point fingers when I'm talking to Europeans or Germans, right? They point the fingers and say, "Oh my God, you know, it's so." You know, they only hear what they hear in Europe is the news about there was a school shooter, right? Or there was an attack, or there was someone that was mentally ill, was, you know, attacking people in public. That's the news that you hear mainly overseas. You know, you don't really see the statistics about that. Most households have guns, and it's not the more guns that the more dangerous, you know, the system is, right? So, but also in the US, you can see that no matter who is in charge, right? No matter who is in charge of the country, you will not be able to remove the constitutional right, right? Because we see now we see now, like the Democratic Party, they did not really, I mean, they limited a little bit, right, percentage of, you know, full automatic weapons, right? But they did not say we have to get rid of the constitutional right, or we have to somehow try to limit people from getting guns, right? So it doesn't really matter if it's a, you know, a Republican or a Democratic president in charge, because the country is that's the history of the country. You cannot take away the right to bear to have weapons from an American citizen.
Right, right. That's interesting. And I'm sure we could probably keep going on this, but on just this one, you know, this one right that's not guaranteed in Germany, but is guaranteed here in the US. But I'm also curious about the very first one you mentioned, and I'd love to know if you can expand on that. You said it's the right to human dignity. Is that what it was?
Yes.
So,
the right of human dignity. That means that a person, an individual, can never be an object of the government. So it always has to, it cannot lose its dignity. You know, as soon as a child is born, it is equipped with human dignity. No matter what this person is doing in his life, you know, crimes, no crime, it does not matter. The dignity can never be taken away. So that's one eternal clause. So no matter if you have a serial killer, right? This person is still has still the right to exercise his human dignity, like, you know, fair trial and all these things, right?
okay, so that's what I was going to ask. What does human dignity mean? So let's say we're talking about hypothetically, right? Somebody's been charged with murder, and I assume in Germany it's also innocent until proven guilty, right?
Yes.
And in the US it's supposed to be that, but we talked about that. That's not really real, but that's a whole topic for another conversation. But let's get back to the human dignity. So if that's the case, right? If somebody's been charged with first-degree murder, you said just right now, you said that means that they're entitled to a trial. What else does it mean to have human dignity?
So human dignity means that we have a lot of examples. When we're like in law school, we have this, you know, all the time. We have to practice this all the time. That means, first of all, that the government cannot treat an individual like an object. So that means torture is forbidden under any circumstances, right? Even if you try to get out, you know, something that only the perpetrator knows, or only the, you know, the suspect, right? Until in the trial, the suspect could know, right? Where's the victim? Where's the weapon? Like all these things. You can never torture or even threaten someone to be tortured. That's already against the human dignity, right? It's that easy. Like when people say you have to you know, weigh in what do you want to get out of it, right? And under certain circumstances, the you know, torture should be allowed. Then it's like it's the common knowledge that under the law, right? That's how we learn it, at least in law, that you can never threaten someone to torture, right?
Yeah. So besides trial, not being, you know, not coercing somebody, not torturing somebody, what else would it mean for that individual that's been charged with first-degree murder?
So yeah, what I wanted to say also, what is pretty funny actually, that in Germany a defendant is allowed to lie in court, right? That's very different from the US, as far as I know, right? You are allowed to lie in court to the judge and to anyone. That's not illegal. That's not a new crime. In the US, it would be considered a new crime, right?
Yep. Yep.
You are allowed to lie to the police as a suspect, right? If you're not, the only exception is you cannot falsely accuse someone else, right? Or help someone else to get away with a crime. That's not allowed. But you can lie about your participation, what you did, what you didn't do, right? There's a big difference between the US and in Europe. Also, it's legal in Germany to escape from prison and to help someone else in prison to escape from prison. That's not a crime.
Really?
So yes, so when you get caught, you will not face a new trial because of that. So that's not a new crime, right? It's surprising. It's surprising, yeah. Also, you have the right to refuse to testify against your fiance, not only your spouse, right? And as we know, like to say that's my fiance is, you know, you don't have to prove anything, right? because there is not a legal procedure you have to do. Right. So you can easily say, instead of boyfriend, girlfriend, you can call someone your fiance, and then you don't have to testify as a witness in court.
Yeah. So I know we're going into on a different direction, but I like the direction we're going in. I'm curious about something. One of the things that I've been doing a little bit more research on, and we're getting ready to produce a lot of content on this, is Miranda rights, right? So you just said you can lie to police as long as you're not falsely accusing somebody else, or as long as you're not trying to help somebody else get away with a crime, right? But other than that, you can lie to them about your own involvement in any potential or possible crime. So here in the US, we have, our Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and Miranda rights and all that. But as you know, Miranda rights are not really what people think they are. I mean, there's tons of loopholes, right? And police officers are able to successfully circumvent Miranda rights in so many different ways. And there's tons of case law throughout the country, just different techniques that have been used in different states. But I'm wondering, is there something similar to Miranda rights?
Yes, we have exactly the same. So we have the defendant is allowed to remain silent, right, during any step of the trial, even an investigation already, in a police investigation. You have the right to remain silent, and everything that you say can and will be used against you in court, right? So everything you don't say, they're practically, like on paper, you cannot, the police officer cannot use it against you, right? But what happens in reality is, if you don't have a defense attorney, and you exercise your right to remain silent, there are some tendencies that say that have, that at least it will be in the report. You didn't say anything, right? You didn't have a defense attorney that taught you so. So that should mean something, right? That you didn't, that you actively, refused to collaborate. If you have a defense attorney, that's, even better, because they can, fight against the law enforcement and the, everything that has been done by law enforcement. So what is also a very, very important thing for a suspect when they're first getting investigated is that you have to be read your rights, right, before knowing if you're a witness or a suspect. So if that hasn't happened and you get a defense attorney, that's the first thing that we will, fight in court. And then whatever you said cannot be used against you. Right. So if the police officers, they sometimes forget, they sometimes are in a rush, they sometimes are not motivated, right? And they forget to read your rights fully, that you have a right to a defense attorney, you have the right to remain silent, all these things. And also, what are you actually charged with, right? Why is the police investigating, right? And are you a witness, or are you already a suspect? If that's not exactly how it should be, right, in the protocol, that's the first thing that, it gets pretty much smashed in court, right? It's the first thing, and they cannot have a second chance about that. So whatever you said, probably admitted something in the beginning, cannot be used against you.
Now, here's something interesting that I mean, you touched on so many interesting points. I could tell that we're gonna have probably 20 parts to this series, because there's so many different things that you've touched on that I think are fascinating, and I think we could really dive into. But one thing that, just the very last thing you said right now, you said that, if they violated that person's rights, that you can keep that out. Now, here in the US, you have Miranda rights, and you have all this body of law that is, kind of been, that has come from that, right? In every single state. But as you know, there's exceptions and exceptions to the exceptions, and it just keeps going and going and going, to where it's quite common for somebody's Miranda rights, right? Just for the average person, they look at it like, oh, that's a clear Miranda violation. But there's all these exceptions, and then there's so much interpretation, and there's so much discretion for judges. So that what ultimately ends up happening is that a lot of times all that stuff comes in anyways. Is it like that in Germany? Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Well, it always depends on, what did you say in the first place, right? And can that be removed? Can that be, corrected afterwards, right? Because in some situations you might be, overwhelmed with the situation. You want to say something. You don't want to completely remain silent, right? Even if you know you should never talk to the police in the first place until you get a defense attorney, right? That is, like stepping in and is, telling you what to say and what not to say. You might say something just because you're stressed or nervous, right? And as I said, if there are formal mistakes, right, by the law enforcement, then you have a very good chance of removing that. Now, if they did everything correct by the protocol, it's very hard to get that ever removed, So the judge will hold it against you. The prosecutor will hold it against you, right? It's for a defense attorney almost impossible when everything was correct, in the protocol. And especially if law enforcement, there were at least 2 police officers that witness each other's statements, for example, right? Because it's like in most cases, it's not only one police officer. So they will back each other up, and you have probably no chance to prove that, you wasn't treated the correct way.
Right. Do they have body cam footage? And do the police officers have body cam footage over in Germany?
No. So we had the pilot project in Hamburg, right? In the north of Germany, we had that, but it hasn't been established in the police force. So it's you will not find it, right? We don't have body cam. We also what they use in the cars is the camera in the car itself, but yeah. So no body cam. So not a lot of proof actually. If there's one defendant, one police officer. What is also very interesting, what I see in Florida, is a lot of police officers or female officers are driving by themselves. So that's not allowed in Germany. You always have to be at least 2. You cannot be on duty alone. It's one aspect that is for protection of the officer, but also a big part is to prove actually what happened.
Right. Interesting. You also mentioned a couple times about counsel being provided. That's interesting. So it's similar to the U.S. where counsel is provided if it can, if you cannot afford one. Can you speak to that a little bit? I'd love to know kind of how that differs from the system here in the U.S.
Yes. So the suspect is, as soon as you're getting arrested, right, or as soon as you're subject to investigation, you have to be read your rights, that you are allowed to appoint, like to call your own defense attorney that you want to, right? In the case you don't have one and you say like, I don't have one, I need one, right? The police has to give you at least a list of, public defenders, right? And you can call them through, right? If you say I cannot afford it, right? I cannot afford to pay it myself, then the court will appoint a public defender for you, right? But it's in most cases it's just the fact that they get paid by the court, right? Same as in the US, and it makes it almost impossible for them to be highly motivated or to be extremely ambitious about the case, because the fees they can actually charge, which is sad, are low compared to what they charge when they're a chosen counsel for a case.
Right. And do the public defenders there in Germany, like, what's the general kind of reputation, like generally speaking? Because here in the U.S., like, as you know, right, they have the reputation that they're not as good, they don't work as hard, they're really more like horse traders. What's the reputation of public defenders in Germany? I'm curious.
So in Germany, we don't have the separation of public defender and defense attorney. So every defense attorney can and usually is a public defender for certain cases. So the thing is that the court has a list of all the defense attorneys, right? Attorneys that are specialists in criminal law, and there's a list, and you can provide to the court your contact information and say, I am available for being a public defender. It's not usually every case. It's once a month or twice a month. And you can say you're available for those cases too, but you can usually you're a criminal defense attorney, so you have a lot of other cases, right? That you're willingly taking on. So it's not only what the court is providing you. So I know in the US it's like, if you're a public defender, you're a public defender. You're usually not a criminal defense attorney choosing his or her own cases, right?
That's interesting. I like that system. And given that we're talking about trials and that kind of thing right now, I'm curious, in Germany, if somebody takes a case to trial, is it going to be a bench trial? Is it a jury trial? Do they get to decide? How many people are in the jury, right? Compared to here in the US, I'd love to know that.
So we do not have any jury trial at all.
Oh,
So there's no grand jury, right? We don't have anything like that. The only country, if I'm not mistaken, is the UK in Europe, right? It still has a jury system, because we don't have the common law system. We have civil law system. That means every case is decided by a judge, at least one judge, and it depends on the gravity of the crime or the felony, right? The more severe it is, the more judges we have. So we can have one judge. We can also, for example, like murder would have 3 judges, right? By profession. So it's also interesting, to hear your point of view. Would that be fairer, or would that be actually, lead to more wrong verdicts?
wrongful
Because
convictions.
yeah, exactly.
Well, and you're asking me that's exactly
Yes.
the question I was
Yes.
going to ask you.
Yes, because so for one example would be to say people like 12 people, right, the grand jury, who are not legal professionals, right,
Mhm.
who are not trained in the law, are deciding over someone's future or even over someone's death in the
Right.
worst case, right? In some states, it's about the death penalty. So is that fair? Like, I have a hard time believing that, if it's fair, right? Because if you're a suspect in a crime, in a case, right, in criminal law, then if not a legal professional is deciding over that, right? Because it's about the law, it's about like all these little details that matter, right? Someone that is not trained can easily be persuaded, convinced, manipulated by either the prosecutor or the defense attorney, right? Emotions play a big role. Emotions and, credibility of someone. Do I like the person's face or not? Do I like the person's background? Like, of course you're allowed to have, a fair jury, but how do you really make sure that you get a fair jury, right? And that no one is, has any prejudice against you. So I believe it's only my personal opinion that, having a jury system makes it not fair. Makes it even more, the outcome of the case is depending on, do people like you?
Yeah.
Right? In the end, do people like your attorney?
Right.
Or not? Right? That plays a big role, because we have seen cases in history that a case that was very clear that, you don't have enough evidence, right? It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. And the person was got still convicted, right? Because the defense attorney, what he has to do, like, what is the goal? He has to present an alternative scenario. That's enough, right? If you just say it could have been someone else because there was not enough evidence for my client, right? That's already enough. You don't have to present someone else. You don't have to present another person to them. But a lot of people, like, not legal professionals, they do not understand. They say, who else should it have been? Right? They don't understand that you don't have to prove that you're innocent. The government, the prosecutor, has to prove that you are guilty.
Yeah.
And it's in so many cases, it's like playing with emotions, right?
No, I agree with you completely. In fact, I have a bunch of content where I talk a little bit about some of the nuances that you just pointed out right there. And I love that you were asking me the same question, because I was actually that you were the first one to vocalize the question, but I was already thinking, oh, I'm about to ask her what's better, what does she think and why? But to answer your question, to answer the same question, I agree with almost everything you said, but I think that because, and I'm a little more cynical, right? And I'm a little more cynical, and even though I agree with most of what you said, where the judges are definitely more experienced in the law, they're a little bit less susceptible to emotion. But my concern is that and I don't know how it is in Germany, right? How judges are selected, and maybe that could be the next thing we address. But I know that I've seen, right? Not just I've seen this numerous times, and I talk to this where judges can also be very biased, right? Judges, they're human beings, and there's a lot of injustices that have taken place, big cases, right, throughout history, here U.S. history, where a judge was in big part to blame for wrongful conviction or wrongful execution, when the stakes are super high, when it's a life sentence or when somebody's going to be executed, right? And judges sometimes are behind those bad decisions. Now, if you get three judges, there's arguably a better chance that won't happen. But at the same time, if they're buddies, they know each other, they hang out together, right? They see each other at all these social events. There's also they're human, right? So there's also that component where if one of them is among them three is the alpha, right? It could be man or woman, but the alpha, the leader of those three, because of their social kind of interactions and social outside the court type relationships, it would be very easy for the other two judges, or one of those, right, to maybe have some doubts or reservations, but because of his relationship to that other judge, he could easily buckle, just like any human being might. Now, that's not to say that would always happen, but the risk is there. If you ask me for my opinion, I think, and I'm thinking outside the box and kind of going against the grain here, but I think with all the new technology that's come out with AI, I think that there's a way that we might be able to use AI together with a human component, right? Because you still need the human component to be able to arrive at better verdicts, right? So, because I mean, there's just tons of stuff. I'm still learning about what's all out there, right, with regard to AI. But AI can record everything, it can synthesize information, it can listen to changes in somebody's voice, right? Because sometimes there's and like for example, it can read. You can have a camera on the person's face, reading their their retina to see if they're lying or they're being honest. And you don't have that be necessarily 10% or 20% of the component in AI making a decision, but maybe it's a 3%, right? Like their eyes, and maybe their micro expressions is another 3%, right? And you would have to have tons of data, right, to back this up. So, and maybe you'd have to input into AI, hey, this is a Hispanic man from Los Angeles, and because of that, you're going to have to the micro expression database you're going to have to pull from is a little bit different because his expressions are going to be different, right? Or this is an Asian man from from the Philippines, and culturally these are what their micro expressions are, and this is what it means. But you don't have that be, for example, like I said, a big component of guilty or not guilty, right? But just a small percentage, and then a deep analysis into the evidence that's presented, and also the voice, right? Listen to the frequency of the voice and analyze that, compare that throughout a whole trial, right? Because if you haven't testified, you have a lot of data there. If there's police interviews that come into get admitted at trial, you can compare the voice frequency there. And so I don't know, it's a crazy idea, but I think maybe AI maybe is the solution.
But what's the problem with AI? I didn't want to you cut you off, but the problem with AI is that AI will not be able to do the thinking process. So that's a very important part of finding a verdict. It's either the jury that has to unanimously, right, with one voice say what they are deciding on, right, guilty or not guilty, and then the judge who makes the decision about the range actually of the consequences, right? So the thinking process is only be done by a human brain. So AI will what AI is good for. It gives you answers. It gives you maybe standard answers, maybe not, right? Unbiased, hopefully, but it only gives you those answers that were previously fed by human brains into the computer, right? AI is not creating anything completely new, right? AI cannot think. So that's the problem with AI, right? To replace, the law system, right? Or, courts with AI will not work because of every case is different, right? I mean, we have the law, but still every case has a lot of different details, right? And has a lot of different nuances. So you cannot put AI in place because AI will give you what what, you know, what history has fed into the system.
Yeah, so I agree with the input, right? And I thought about that, the input of the data, because we have that problem here in Utah, right? Where, like, just to give you an example, like to be able to get a jury panel, right? You have to, you have to call in, let's say it's a first degree murder, you have to call in 100 people, 120, whatever it is. And quite often what happens is that the people that show up, they're not very diverse, right? Even though the community here is diverse, the people that get called in, it's not very diverse, and that's definitely something that it's been fought a little bit before. It's never been taken to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the argument that Utah has is they say, well, wait a minute, we use this method and this method, and it's AI, it's just generated, right? But the problem is in the way that it's programmed, right? Like the programming in itself. So, and that's not to say, by the way, just to make clear, you could have a jury that's not diverse and still be fair, right? So, but the reason I bring that up as an example is because you're talking about the inputting of the information. So I think that there is definitely something that needs to be explored a little bit more. As far as like how the thinking part of it, my thinking was it would be a combination, right, of human and AI. And one, maybe if it someday heads in that direction, we'll find out if it's a good system or a better system or not. But if, for example, if at the end of a trial, right, because you can, like, it's so much more advanced now, right? You can put in all of the code, right? All of the statutes in that state, and it'll synthesize it, it'll analyze it, and then you can feed all the jury instructions, and then it could probably come up with some synthesis at the end of a trial where it gives you likelihood that this person or that this evidence, blah, 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 and start giving you statistics and numbers, and maybe have a professional, like a professional, I'm not going to say judge, but have a professional, trained professional that could probably look at that data and make a decision based on that data. And maybe not even just one person, maybe you have 3 people, 3 professionals, and they all independently have to make a decision, right? Without being next to each other. That peer pressure, I think people don't understand how powerful that is. Peer pressure, they've done tons of studies on this stuff. So even if you, like, for example, you're representing somebody who's innocent, and you have 2 people out of 11 that think you're right, right? Attorney Zambrano is representing an innocent man that should not be executed, right? But if among those other 9, there's 2 or 3 or 4 other people that are very persuasive, that are very alpha, very dominating, very intimidating, people don't understand how easy it could, because you're locked up in that little tiny room, and it's all of you together, and you can't go anywhere, and you're missing your family, and you're missing, like, there's all this, right? Their lives are going on, and they want to be done with this. And they get locked up in these rooms for days and weeks and sometimes months. And it'd be very easy for these other 9 people to slowly persuade the other people, not because they're right, but because that's just, some
external circumstances, exactly. The pressure, they don't want to be there anymore. They want it to be over. Nobody, like, everyone's tired, right? You listen to hearings, like extensive hearings as a non-legal professional, right? It's extremely tiring for people that that haven't chosen this, because it's a duty that you have to do in the US. It's not that you say, oh my God, I want to do that, right? Or I cannot wait. You have to sometimes get off work for all these weeks. You cannot come home, right? You cannot exchange communication with anyone. You're not allowed to watch the TV, to listen to the radio, right? All these things that are limiting your life for this certain time of period. So, but also what I wanted to say is that if you have a good and motivated defense attorney, he will attack those jury members, right, in the beginning, that he sees, there's a lot of investigation going on in the law firm, that, the legal professionals, the paralegals have to, search for everything. Like, did this person post something on their social network, right? Against Latinos, against Blacks, against, you have to remove this person from the jury, right? Or does this person, you will find so many things to at least erase those that are biased, right? Or they had a similar case, or if it was something about, sexual assault, you can, try to remove those who were victims before, right? Because you cannot have those people in an unbiased jury. So a good defense attorney who is like, who is compensated accordingly, because it's a lot of work, right? Will take the time and have, the whole team of his office look into the things, right? Be like private investigators almost. Look through everyone's history, right? Do they have, a similar history? Were they victims? Yeah, do they have any preferences, right, regarding race, regarding, like that's important. That's very important. And also, you can also reject judges, right? If you have a judge that you see, okay, he has a social media, right? He's posting like a lot of things. That's amazing for the defense attorney, because you can pick and say, this person already had a certain preference or prejudice against a certain group of people, and the defendant belongs to this kind of group, right? So you can, you just have to be open-minded, right? And then try to do the best that you can do for your client, right?
Yeah.
But if you get a public defender, he gets paid by the government, by the court, it's highly unlikely that this person is going to put so much love and passion into something and cannot take on other cases in the meantime, right? How is this person going to pay his employees, right? Or continue working as an attorney if that takes sometimes years or at least months. So it's not fair, right? I think public defenders should be compensated much better, right? So that a suspect who cannot afford a private attorney, right, who cannot pay for it, has the same chances, right, and has the same access to a fair trial than someone that has just like a lot of savings or has money to pay it.
Right, right. I agree completely. So do you find that that's the case, both that disparity, right, in resources allocated towards public defenders? Do you find that that's a similarity or a dissimilarity between the American criminal justice system and then in Germany?
That's pretty similar. I would say pretty similar. It's not that public defenders, I know in the US they have a bad reputation in general, right? Because everyone knows they're not putting in their motivational, the most motivational time and and dedication. In Germany, like they get also not compensated well, right, for those cases. But I would say they're still, they are still criminal defense attorneys who have cases that are very well compensated, and then they have one or two cases that they have to take on, right, and get paid by the court. So they're still as motivated, right, because they still can, compensate with other cases, and not like public defenders in the States who only get those kind of cases, right, and don't get paid throughout all these cases.
Right, right. And in all fairness, and that's one of the things that I cover in my content too, is there are exceptions. There are public defenders that are really good. I know that, yeah, there's definitely exceptions. There's public defenders that, my hat's off to them. They do a phenomenal job. They, I know of a handful here locally that have had some big victories, some big wins for their clients. So there's definitely exceptions, but generally speaking, that's not the case. And I think it does traces back to the money. And it's unfortunate. So, here in the US, we can do what's called, and I'm curious to know if you also have that in Germany, you can do on a federal level, it's called a FOIA. And then at the state level here, it's called a grandma request. But essentially what it comes down to is where you can request any government record. And I've used that to request the contracts that the public defenders have with the county. And, the numbers are still in the millions, but it's millions over, it's a few $1,000,000 a year. But if you break up the number of cases that they have, all the overhead, all the private investigators, I mean, you just take everything into account. It really is, it's a flimsy contract. It really is not enough money that's been allocated to defend not hundreds, but thousands of people. If you do the numbers, right, they get paid just hypothetically, right? Because the one that I did the grandma request is a little bit older. It was $4 million. But if you divide that over, let's say, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 cases that they have in a year, really the county is only allocating a very small, almost insignificant amount per person. And that's why they cannot allocate all their heart and soul and their passion to really fighting for every single person that they believe is innocent,
Yes, but usually that's how it is. In Germany, the defense attorney, right, is requesting all the files. It's requesting the protocols from the police, from the first investigation, right? It's requesting all the witnesses, you know, all the files, all the, you know, statements that witnesses have done, right, have made in this case. Anything that was found, right, you know, evidence that was found. Everything is being requested before the trial starts, right? So you're perfectly prepared for the worst case, right? And then you have to actually like step in and try to cross-examine, you know, like, you know, the law enforcement officer that was first on the crime scene, for example, right? So that is like the goal of a defense attorney, right? In that case, that you do not have to prove that your client is innocent. You have to just create or try to create, you know, the scenario that my client is not the only one here, right? There are certain elements that are still not proven, right?
Yeah.
So if there's no, like if the DNA is contaminated, for example, right? Or if there was not, you know, the weapon was not found, right? All these traces, or you cannot trace the DNA of the client to the crime scene, or there were like a lot of different traces. So you just have to open, you know, open the case to more suspects, right? Because in a lot of cases we see, I think in the US as well, but especially in Germany, that the law enforcement officers who try to do a good job, there are like a lot of amazing law enforcement officers, but also some that just try to focus, right, on the first person that, you know, that could have a motive, right? So, and then they focus on this person like, you know, like an eagle, right? You cannot and do not, you know, do not really investigate in, you know, in more in the environment of this person, right? Because sometimes motives are extremely diverse. It's not always about you know, the family, extended family, or extended workforce, right? There's more to it. There are random crimes, right? There are, you know, there are crimes without a clear motive, or without, you know, any any motivation in the first place. So it's at least, I think it's the same in the US as well, that you have, you know, one main suspect, and there's, in rare cases, that the police investigates further to see, do we have other suspects? Because if they have a great defense attorney, then this defense attorney will create the scenario and say, okay, they did not even look into it, right? They did not even make any other research. He was presented as a main suspect. And it's not the investigation they should have done, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And as you're talking about this, it's bringing up all these emotions, because it reminds me of a gentleman that I know personally. We were with one of my former partners. We were trying to help him out, and he was already incarcerated for over 20 years, and it was interesting. You know, he was the prime suspect when the crime first happened. They thoroughly investigated him. They did everything possible, right? And those were good police officers, and they determined, no, like, there's no way, like, it's, you know, even though he was the prime suspect, there's no way this guy did it. So they closed the case. Well, they put him off to the side. There's no way he did it. Like, it's more than obvious, right? He didn't do it, even though he was the prime suspect. And they keep working on the case. A few months or a few years go by. They close the case. New officer comes on board 10 years later, right from the time of the crime. And he wants to make a name for himself. And he's got all this pressure that, hey, look, it's been 10 years. We have a cold case. And he decides he's going to reopen the file. He's going to go ahead and make the same guy the prime suspect. But this time he's going to ignore all the evidence that they had, all the, you know, all the stuff that they found at the time of the crime, the night of the crime, and shortly thereafter. He's going to ignore all of the evidence that makes it clear he's not guilty, and he's going to focus only on the circumstantial evidence, which is real flimsy. But it was enough. It was enough that he took, you know, he was able to get first-degree murder charges put on this guy. They took him to trial. They convicted him, and he spent over 20 years in prison. And it was, like you said, it was one of those officers. There's no integrity. There's no principles, values. I mean, or not good values, at least. But he was able to successfully. This new police officer came on board, was able to successfully convict an innocent man, like, and took essentially most of his life away, most of his adult life.
Yeah, but I believe also that if I'm not mistaken, I read that the US is one of the countries with the highest wrongful conviction rates, actually. What is a little bit surprising, because we think that, it's the oldest democratic system, right? It's the oldest legal system that is still in place. A lot of countries copied the system, actually. UK, Germany has a lot of those principles from the American system, right? So it's a little bit surprising that, the first world country and the biggest and the most modern society in the world has one of the highest, or if not the highest, wrongful conviction rates. That's possibly also because, there's just so much going on. Like, you have certain judges and prosecutors get a certain time to do, the prosecutor to do the investigation, right? And the longer you take, the more likely it is that it becomes a cold case, right? And that's the nightmare for every law enforcement officer, right? To have cold cases that you couldn't solve, that you have to leave to your colleague, right?
Yeah, and honestly, despite the fact that that it's got some areas that are flawed, I still think it can be improved significantly with just a few tweaks. We'll have to leave that for another conversation, but maybe just a few thoughts, as we wrap up, just a few thoughts on that. Do you think it's hopeless? There's no way to fix the American criminal justice system? I mean, you live here, and I mean, if you're going to raise a family here, that's important, right? So just speaking strictly about the US, do you think that the system could be fixed, or with easily it'd be a lot of work, or just it's a lost case?
So I believe, so the US, like, for me, the best country in the world. You can say there are like a lot of things that are not as they should be, right? Because the standard should be much higher. The standard is extremely high, right? If you compare it to other countries. But in a lot of areas, you're surprised by also the criminal justice system. You're surprised how a lot of these things can happen in the first place, right? Wrongful convictions, right? You have, amazing laws, right? And how could you just turn it against someone when this person cannot be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, for example? So I believe there's a lot of potential. So what I think is that there's a lack in employees, especially in the criminal justice system, right? So the courts don't have, enough people, right, that are working on cases. The also correction officers, like, there's a huge lack of those kind of people, right? To make it fairer, to make it safer in prisons, right? So that can be done, right? That's not something impossible. So there's an amazing system in place. It's just there are so many loopholes that if you want to, you have a way, right, to get away with something, or to you turn it against someone, right? So I believe if you support it more, like financially, right, the government has to support institutions more, the criminal law system, and also prisons, right, to prepare prisons to help someone that has been convicted, right, to get out sooner, right, to get a job, right, to start their life again. So it's almost like when I see people that were convicted, it came out, all of them were by themselves, right? So either way you make it, right, you're intelligent enough, you're motivated enough, you're ambitious enough, or you're not, right? There are no other, there's only one or the other. This is like most people are struggling forever, right? They can never get back the life they had before, right? So it's extremely, I think the system is just extremely tends to self-responsibility and freedom. And the government does not take care of individuals. You can say that's amazing, right? I don't want to have, any government involved in my life, right? Others may need governmental help for a certain period of time, right? To get on track, to get back on track. So I believe it's a financial problem that obviously it's not the highest priority because the money is there, right? You could easily put more finances into those kind of areas, right? Into the legal system, into prisons, into also to reintegrate convicted people, right, into society back again. But those programs are not as good or not as common. And to find people working in those areas, they're just paid not well, right? So how can you just we wouldn't do the work, right? We wouldn't do the work in those kind of areas, because if you have the choice, you would do your own thing, right? You would try to build your own business and work for, and not work for someone and get paid for all these hours and overtime, right? So I think it's a financial problem, but it's not something cannot be fixed, because it's like the Constitution is amazing, right? The Constitution is an amazing, it's one of its kind, right? It's not surprising that a lot of countries copied it. So the foundation is there, but I believe due to financial reasons, we have this lack and this this gap between justice and injustice in a lot of places.
Yeah, yeah. You touched on so many great points, and we're definitely going to have to, in the next parts that we're going to do, we're going to have to talk about some of those. One final thing I'd like to point out, just to corroborate and support what you just said right there, because you made so many great points. But one thing that came to mind is you're talking about people getting out and having the support. I'd like to just kind of point out for our audience, some of the ridiculous things that one of the ridiculous things that exist, and it's that, for example, here in Utah, and I'm sure in other states is similar. They, for somebody who's been incarcerated for longer than, I don't know what it is, 6 months, a year, they have this thing called the gate pass, right? They give the inmate $200, which I think is ridiculous. $200 is nothing. I mean, like, that pays for what, 2 days at a motel, or 3 days at a motel, and what about food? And so what I mean. So that's number one. But here's the kicker. This is what makes it interesting. It's not that they're given $200. Is when you realize that the prisons will fight, and they have all these rules to do everything possible to not give this inmate the $200. They have all these silly little rules. Well, you get it, but except if this, or if this, and if this happens, if that happens, if you had $20 in your books, or if you had more than $9 in the last 45 days, you don't get anything. In prisons that make, they get funded, right? Millions, hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes every year to run these operations. And the cost to taxpayers is what, different studies say different numbers, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. And instead of giving somebody the $200, like, the prisons will go out of their way to not give that person a fighting chance, not even enough for food when they get out.
Yeah.
They will fight to not give that $200. Like the irony of that, the how ludicrous that is just mind-blowing to me.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. But Vera, we are out of time. It's been a pleasure again. Thank you for being on the show. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you? I mean, you're a practicing attorney. You're good at what you do. How can they get a hold of you?
Yes, you can contact us via email, right? You can reach us via phone. Look up the website, law firm Vera, Zambrano and Associates. The email is info@lawyer-berlin-miami.com. Yes, I believe you can just Google it online. We have a lot of presence. We have a lot of legal blogs, right, to read for free. So a lot about our criminal justice system as well in criminal cases. So educate yourself, and we would like to also encourage people to reach out to us, to you, or to me, and also leave their questions. If they have any questions about it, or say that was not clear, can you explain again, or or they see it completely different, right? We highly encourage people to reach out and to have a discussion about it, and maybe we can pick up next time on their questions.
Yeah, we have. In fact, we've gotten a lot of emails, right, from from the last one that we did, the last podcast. So I'd love to be able to address some of those questions. We just barely scratched the surface on this, so I'm looking forward to our next one. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to our next one.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, and don't forget, everyone, share this content with your friends. Let's make a difference. Let's make a difference. Enough is enough. let's get the word out there, right? We're going to try to continue producing good content and give you some insight, right, into how we can improve our system and